Good afternoon, everyone. This is the final stretch, and we have a treat for you. We're going to talk about a very up-and-coming and already exploding startup scene in the global picture, which is Southeast Asia, and we have some of the most prominent investors and entrepreneurs serving and being super active in this market. My name is John Nahm, and I'm the co-founder and managing partner of Strong Ventures, which is a seed fund that supports and finances Korean and global entrepreneurs. So without further ado, I want to give an opportunity to my distinguished panelists here to introduce themselves and also to tell your entrepreneurial story, maybe short version, and also a little bit about your current involvement in the Southeast Asian market. We'll start with Semin. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Semin. I run a corporate venture capital firm out of Singapore called Rakuten Ventures. We are a $100 million USD venture capital arm of Rakuten, the e-commerce conglomerate. And we do investments around Southeast Asia and also Israel and also the US. We've been pretty active overall in the Southeast Asia ecosystem. We've made up, I think we've deployed about 20 million USD, and out of that, maybe over 70% of it has been in Southeast Asia, ranging from content consumption, C2C marketplace, and things related to market liquidity with carrier billing. So we're very excited about the marketplace, and we continue to actually keep our eyes out and try to build value-added services to the ecosystem that we built.
Thank you.
Hi,
Eric.
My name is Eric Manlunas. I'm a co-founder and managing partner of Wavemaker Partners. We're a cross-border, dually headquartered early-stage venture firm out of Los Angeles and Singapore. About half and half of our investments are both sides. With 3 funds, about 85 million across 3 funds, and we do nothing but early stage investments. And from an entrepreneurial perspective, I was a startup operating guy back in the 90s, did a couple of startups, one in e-commerce in 1996 and one in internet services in 99.
I'm Nix Nolledo. I run a company called Xurpas Inc. We're the largest consumer tech company out of the Philippines, and we're the only publicly listed consumer technology company in emerging markets Southeast Asia. So Xurpas has been investing in tech companies in Southeast Asia in order to expand its business. We call ourselves e-commerce for digital goods, but on the side, I'm also a very active angel investor, placing some bets on companies in Singapore, Thailand, obviously my country, Philippines, Indonesia, and a few other markets.
Thank you. And Nix, we'll start the next question with you. This is your second time in Korea. The first one was a personal visit, but this time it's on business. And you had a chance to just fellowship and hang out with the Korean startups and Korean investors and also some global investors. What are some of your reactions, insights, sort of feedback from your current visit to Seoul? And welcome, by the way, again. Yeah.
Thank you. So before I flew in and did a round of meetings yesterday and today, I actually had this impression that a lot of the big e-commerce, mobile content type of business categories around technology already had very clear winners. And I didn't realize that there were still several empty spaces, market areas that were still up for grab. And it's a perception that I guess it was a bubble that was bursted. And now I feel that there are, again, so many interesting products and services and business opportunities and room for growth for the market, really, in the consumer technology sector.
It's Eric's first time to Seoul, and he brought his Gangnam-style shoes with him from Los Angeles. And we're going to test them out later at the lounge. By the way, don't forget to join us at the at the after party at 9 p.m. in Itaewon. You can find the details in the guidebook and on the way out. So, Eric, apart from the Gangnam Style Ready Dance, what are some feedback on the Korean market?
No, I'm very impressed. Just going around the hallway yesterday and today, I'm fascinated to see a lot of the innovative startups out there. And the 5 presentations today were also pretty impressive. So I knew Korea was way ahead from a consuming power and from a behavioral perspective. So it's finally nice to see it on the ground, and hope to be back a lot more times.
Semin, a lot of people have been asking me, where did Semin grow up? His English is perfect, and during the conference, can you give us a little bit? I mean, Semin comes to Korea very often, so I want to ask you a little bit about your background, and also how has your Korean experience evolved over time after each visit? Because for me, every time I come, something's new and different.
For me, I started out my career I worked in a bunch of startups, and then I worked in Hyundai Card, which is a credit card company in Korea. And then I ended up working for about 4 to 5 years in Google, handling business development and some of the sales stuff. For me, when I come back to Korea, every time, the great thing is that I've looked at the Korean startup ecosystem very seriously for the past 2 years. And every time I come, what's really cool is that when I see a startup, the proportion of engineer to business guy is becoming more and more lopsided, as in I see more engineers to the startups that are building out, which is really, really positive for me, because that means the company has more chances of being adaptable and more scalable for the future and roll out for global companies.
Excellent. And my next question is, so a lot of people here in Korea and beyond Korea are very interested in the Southeast Asian market. It is sort of, sometimes people feel that it's less challenging than going into the Chinese market or the US market. And so there's a lot of interest, especially in Korea, about what's happening in Southeast Asia. Can you share with us what are some of the hot companies or hot sectors that you see in the Southeast region? This can be companies in your own portfolio or companies that you see quite clearly in your radar. Can you share some of those? Go ahead.
So, just a snapshot of Southeast Asia. I think internet penetration is about 30%. The whole population of all of the countries there is about 700 million. A lot of the economies there are growing very swiftly. 5 to 7% annual growth rate. So a lot of the people in emerging markets, Southeast Asia, is starting to get wealthier and wealthier. Plus, you'll have a market like Singapore, which has become a hub for VCs and startups and technology, and the government has been quite supportive, giving a lot of incentives for companies to relocate and establish their presence there, sort of as a jump-off point to other markets. A lot of interesting startups, like we were talking about this earlier. I really like a company, for example, like Luxola, which is in the beauty and skincare e-commerce market, sort of like attempting to be the Sephora for Southeast Asia. Clear market leader. The gross merchandise value is growing. It's practically doubling every 4 to 6 months.
What's the sort of valuation that it's being talked about in that company? Rumor-wise, not the official one. Yeah.
$50 to $100 million range, thereabouts. So quite sizable already. Has had a couple of rounds of funding. So that's more on the larger side, I think, of the average valuation of the startups in that part of town. Or you'll have a company, for example, like e-commerce out of Thailand, which is really helping. It's like a GSI commerce in the US. So they've realized that there's so many e-commerce startups in Southeast Asia, and most of them are started by people who come from marketing backgrounds, who don't really have the skill set around supply chain. So for them, they're an end-to-end solution. Everything from warehousing to picking to packing to cash on delivery, card on delivery, managing customer service, all of the customer data, managing returns, around all of your e-commerce supply chain. While the partners that they work with focus on really customer acquisition and product differentiation. So, I mean, there's really a lot of movement, especially in the e-commerce space. A lot of the traditional retailers are not really moving yet, but then you'll have a group, for example, in Indonesia, like Lipo Group, who's starting to feel the pain, I guess, and have decided to invest $500 million in B2C e-commerce in one country alone, Indonesia, to compete against the Rocket Internets and some of the other e-commerce companies that are starting to compete with them.
And feel free to jump in anytime when you have some burning comments. What are the valuation differences that you see compared, for example, to Silicon Valley? I was talking to Seoul Tite yesterday, who's doing the lending club of China, Dian Long, and he was sharing how valuations in China are actually much higher than valuations in Silicon Valley. But what's the comparison level to Silicon Valley valuations and Southeast Asia valuations generally?
So Southeast Asia is not cheap anymore, at least the ones we're seeing, especially certain categories in terms of the segments they're attacking. I would say that Southeast Asia is probably a little bit more expensive than Southern California in certain times, in certain segments. E-commerce, there's a huge upside potential in Southeast Asia, and if your horizon is 10 to 20 years, it's very difficult to lose there if you really have the right infrastructure and right set of investment parameters. So I would say that it's not a cheap market. It's back to your comment earlier. It's not an easier market than China because it's not homogenous. It's 600+ million people, but it's 10 different cultures. So at least the U.S. and China it's a relatively homogenous market where you can create one product and one pricing and it would just fly. In Southeast Asia, you have to localize it 10 different ways. That said, we view those difficulties as opportunities because if it's easy, everybody would be doing it. So, which is probably why Southeast Asia has not been as highly served as other markets. But the minute it the minute it showed up in everybody's radar, valuations start moving up.
You want to share some?
Yeah, for me, I have the luxury of looking at valuations in Southeast Asia, Korea, Japan, and US, and also Israel. I could say right now the sanest, the most normal as an investor valuation that I've seen is actually Israel, outside of all of the regions that I've visited these days. And in many ways, Southeast Asia benefits from the halo effect of not only China, but also that of Singapore, in that they view Southeast Asia, the developing markets like Indonesia, 220 million people, as kind of the next boon to their hockey stick. So in that perspective, yes, I agree with the whole panel that valuations have been going up higher and higher up. And actually, valuations have been trending higher and higher up for specifically not tech-centric companies, but more service-centric companies. So there has been a consistent retreat to safety and safe harbor for old money and new money. E-commerce has always been a very, very big call, but also things like logistic investment has kind of transformed into ride-sharing application investments through Grab taxi and whatnot, and easy taxi and whatnot. So you have a concentric cycle that happens, but the overall micro themes just seem to change just a little bit to allow the investor to see a fresh viewpoint on the economy.
Just a follow-up question to Semin. And it's related to what Eric brought up, and that is that to tackle the Southeast Asian market, yes, you need to localize for the different countries that compose that great region. And Rakuten being a global tech giant of Japanese origin, but now doing a global play across the whole world, how challenging is it to tackle those fragmented Southeast Asian markets, and what are some of the potential success stories that are coming out of there?
I mean, for Rakuten as a whole to tackle Southeast Asia correctly, I'm my harshest critic in that I criticize my group in terms of what they're not doing right, but I also am a champion of what they're doing right overall in the long term. So in terms of what they're doing right, they really get down to the level of localization. You try to work with the merchants and all over the ecosystem of the buyers and sellers. And we don't really spend crazy on marketing. We make sure that our fundamentals are correct, and we try to calibrate that model towards where we can actually have a win-win with the merchants and the buyers and the whole ecosystem. This is a little bit different in terms of how maybe Rocket Internet will try to push as much money and firepower of raw liquidity into the ecosystem until it works. This is kind of the opposite of the way we do it, where we actually try to find an organic balance between what our consumption rate is and how we can actually proliferate a better ecosystem. Now, in terms of what have we done that has worked overseas and has worked in different markets, I think a lot of times over the past maybe 2 years, our acquisition plans have been on point in terms of making sure that we don't see consumption as not only e-commerce, but consumption as an e-commerce consumption of content consumption and overall the ownership of the conversations via the acquisition of Viber. So these things, we try to look at it in a very holistic manner.
Great. Thank you for such insightful comments. Nix, coming back to you, Nix is very modest about his accomplishments, but he's built the top tech company in the Philippines. And his specialty has been, being able to bring all this technology and content and really dig down and localize and just really target the product for the customer base in Philippines and other neighboring markets. Can you share a little bit about that experience?
Well, I started a business back in 2001 with very limited capital, really just, a couple of $1,000s. I wish there was a venture capital community back then, but coming from a market like the Philippines, which is still, from a GDP per capita perspective, much poorer than a lot of its neighbors in the wealthier parts of Asia. But, one thing I've realized is sometimes your market demographics can become a barrier to entry for foreign competitors. So for example, our country only has a 5% credit card penetration by head count. So a lot of foreign competitors who come to our market look to monetize from a transactional perspective using a credit card playbook when it comes to payment. And we've found a way of finding alternative forms of payment to monetize our customers. Quite comfortably for a long period of time, because a lot of our competitors, the digital goods companies, games, stickers, and all of that, were really only focused on the 5% wealthiest part of the market. When it comes to discovery, a lot of them would do things like television ads and all of that, avenues that didn't really translate to customers paying for goods or doing installs. Because a lot of the people who are watching the television ads didn't really have an internet-capable device. So, we feel, for a lot of third parties, it looks like a limitation. I've found that as I built my company, Xurpas, a lot of the perceived limitations have become advantages for us. And it's really just being able to take advantage of that, while others haven't really caught on the emerging market sort of playbook for monetizing emerging market customers. We feel we were able to buy ourselves some time and have lesser competition. As they say, it's easier to win market space or market share from an empty space. The other thing I feel that we've proven out when we went public last year, just December 2, there was a lot of uncertainty, I think, in the investing public. And even a lot of my contemporaries and peers in the technology sector, they were unsure how our company would perform. And I guess the stock has done quite well since we listed last December. We expect a lot of consumer tech companies, not only in the Philippines, but in other parts of Southeast Asia, to explore that avenue now because of the Xurpas playbook. So it's exciting times, and now that there's more venture capital money, now that the public markets are open, now I think that there are a lot more internet customers now, a lot more smartphones. Southeast Asia should be well poised for further accelerated growth.
Thank you. And a question for Eric, or at least we'll start it with you. So I've been talking to a lot of Korean startup entrepreneurs who, when thinking of being global and going global, as I said, the at least initial perception is that Southeast Asia is less challenging. Although, of course, there's all those localization worries that they have to go through. So at least perception-wise, they think Southeast Asia is the natural first step into global. And then I've been talking to other colleagues who are VC investors, and they also want to start investing in Southeast Asia. So I wanted to ask you how Korean startups and Korean investors can partner with Southeast Asia and startups and Southeast Asian investors, and vice versa. How do you see that playing in the next 5 years? Yeah.
I think there's nothing but upside. I mean, there's a lot of content in this part of the world, Korea, Japan primarily, that are highly applicable in this sort of a social gaming context in Southeast Asia. You can talk to companies like Nix, Xurpas, which has a huge distribution channel and huge reach. So if you're looking to repurpose content for other markets, there's definitely a lot of partnership opportunities there. Localizing it 10 different ways, while sounds very challenging on the surface, it shouldn't be that impossible to do, because you can have 10 different partners that are that are ideal and that have really perfected a localization methodology for each particular market. So. In terms of venture capital, there is definitely nothing but upside once again, because it's coming from a very, very low base. Indonesia and the Philippines have been getting a lot of press lately as the next darlings of Asia, but let's not forget that they're coming off very, very low base. That I think it's just getting started, and a lot of the fiscal stability are actually much better. The fiscal fundamentals, I should say, are a lot better than most developed countries. So from an investor perspective, from a partnership perspective, there's definitely plenty of things to do down there. I believe the Southeast Asian investors will probably stay in Southeast Asia because there's plenty to do. The whole cliche is you hunt where the animals are and where your competitive advantage is. And I don't believe there's any shortage of liquidity in Korea and Japan in particular. So there's no reason for investors in Southeast Asia to come up here and invest. I think what they really need to do is figure out a way where they can take content, they can take products where they can bring it and localize it in Southeast Asia and sort of expand the pie.
Anybody want to add on these thoughts? If not, I want to add that because both Wavemaker Partners and just as an example of potential partnerships going forward, Wavemaker Partners and Strong Ventures, we are headquartered in Los Angeles, but we cover Southeast Asia and Korea respectively. And so we're already seeing partnerships together where Eric is starting to want to invest through us and with us in the South Korean market, and where we want to help Korean startups that want to go into the Southeast Asian market make that move in partnership with great partners like the ones sitting here. It's a very fluid network. We don't have to have formal agreements or partnerships. It's just a matter of emailing each other, calling each other. I email back and forth with Semin, Nix. We were just having a conversation in the backstage about some certain companies. Very fluid partnerships that are happening here through beGLOBAL and other opportunities. So I look forward to a lot more networking happening between Southeast Asian startups that want to get involved with Korea, maybe in terms of product integrations, product distribution, and also Korean companies that want to go into those markets, and they know it's challenging, so they need local partners. And so I'm very excited about that partnerships. We have about 5 minutes left, so I want to leave it open for any questions from the audience. 저기 마이크 좀 도와주실 수 있을까요? Anybody have any question for any of our panelists regarding the Southeast Asian market? Do you see any hands? I can't see. Oh, can you come forward, please? I am sorry. And if you have any other question, if you can come forward and, follow this gentleman.
안녕하세요. 저는 그 한국의 아프리카 TV라고 하는 뉴미디어를 진행하고 있는 BJ 노다 PD라고 하는데요. 현재 그 해외 미국도 그렇고 유튜브라든지 뉴미디어 시장이 커지고 있는데 실제로 이 안에서 뉴미디어의 어떤 스타트업을 보기는 어렵더라고요. 근데 지금 IT 관련해서 이제 미디어 쪽으로 넘어가고 있는 시장에서 동남아라든지 세계적인 어떤 반응은 시장은 어떻게 변하고 있는지 좀 많이 궁금하거든요. 네.
Okay. I may lose a little bit in translation, but I'll give it my best shot. So he's a representative of Africa TV, which is one of the biggest sort of TV and video platforms in Korea, and it's local born and grown, and they have huge penetration here in the South Korean market. So he was very interested in finding out in our conference what are some of the new media innovation and startups that are coming out, and he was a little bit disappointed that he didn't see many. How's the picture in Southeast Asia in terms of new media innovation, products, and so on?
So there's a startup out of the Philippines called Rappler, which is really an online news site. But I think the core innovation of Rappler is it has its own back-end platform that uses crowdsourcing to identify who is the right journalist at the right moment in time to cover which story, the appropriate story. So typical crowdsourcing, what you'll see, for example, with CNN Eyewitness and other types of news sites, is that they will allow the crowd to submit stories to them, and then they will cherry pick from the stories submitted to them which ones they will publish in CNN. A Rappler instead finds a hot news item, uses its analytics to scour social media, Twitter, Facebook, and other channels, and determine who is the right person based on conversation, based on reach, to cover that story for Rappler. So it's able to extend its journalism team and reach and arm by engaging the crowd selectively. So that's, I think, one interesting innovation that actually comes out of the Philippines and now has just opened a bureau in Indonesia in the last couple of months.
Great. You want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, new media is basically old media, just but with a little bit of different branding and different technology. As mentioned before by the dais, we have a lot of things related to news aggregation really happening again. If you actually if you actually looked at a lot of the stuff that's happening in Southeast Asia that has been very popular recently, it actually was originated in Japan. It's a company called Twitcasting. And it's basically, they were Periscope before that Periscope existed, where you can actually do real-time broadcasting and streaming to your live audience. So in that perspective, it doesn't always have to originate from Southeast Asia to be considered a new media that's doing well in Southeast Asia. But definitively, we look at more of the technologies that are in relation to how people consume content more meaningfully. So you have companies like SoftBank that invested in a company called Banjo in the US, right? Where we tried to track as quickly as possible the origin of the news source to give enough time for the actual news creators to make that news item meaningful for those demographics and those geographies. So we have a little bit of a bifurcation of timelines of how we are considered a new media and how people consume it.
Okay. Thank you, Sammy. I'm taking, somebody texted me a question by text. So would you say Singapore is the best place to set up office to start business in Southeast Asia?
I think so. There's no doubt because it has the most mature legal system, and they really enforce their laws. And politically, it's a very stable place. They respect a lot of. Back to the legal side, IP can be really protected, and then more importantly, a lot of incentives in terms of tax reliefs, tax holidays, and that kind of stuff, which is all great for startups and investors alike.
I'm assuming you concur with the points.
I mean, definitely Singapore is one of the best places to create a startup and begin it, but you have to understand that if you develop the product for Singapore, then it'll be made for Singapore and similar demographics and economic development. So it won't be really applicable in many ways without heavy localization to push successfully into other more developing markets. So legally, financially wise, to set up an entity in Singapore is very efficient and effective. But operational wise, in terms of developing a product and making a success, SCA-wide is a very different sales proposition and value proposition.
So I actually have a similar answer. I think from a corporate structure, it's hard to beat Singapore. You save in taxes, there's support from the government and all of that. A ton of incentives. But I think from a size of market perspective, Singapore, number one, is very different from its neighbors. It's much wealthier per capita GDP. And the population is only about 5 million. So I think a market like, for example, the Philippines, which is 100 million people, speaks English very well, has the ethnicity of Southeast Asia, plus at the same time is very fluent in English, very strong developer base. I think it's a very strong market to first launch your product. So it's done well for us, and I can see it do well for other startups that are building traction there.
I think that sounds like an official invitation to come to the Philippines.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Of course.
Okay, well, we are out of time, and we want to thank the amazing panelists for their views and perspectives on the Southeast Asian market. Let's give them a hand.
Thank you.